Hello, everyone. My name is Larrison Manygoats. Welcome to Texas Insider.
I was so shocked.
Mixed emotions filled the movie theater as Native American audience members watched the latest Hollywood blockbuster, Killers of the Flower Moon. The movie's director is the award-winning Martin Scorsese with a celebrity cast of Robert De Niro, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Lily Gladstone. The movie tells a real-life historic strings of murders of Native American of the Osage Nation in Oklahoma and the injustice behind it.
It unveils the hidden many layers of genocide. I never questioned why my Osage grandfather passed.
Ashley Wolf Carson and her family are Osage. She and many other Native Americans were invited to a private screening of Killers of the Flower Moon, hosted by the Crow and Dunleavy law firm. The Tulsa-based firm also has offices in Oklahoma City, Dallas, and Houston.
It's Native American history, it's the history of Indian country, and I think that that's happened uh, across the nation. These occurred right at the same time, and it's just part of the history that has been lost and sometimes gets brushed over. So bringing it out to light to know the truth is very important, and the way that this is done here was very powerful.
Randall Yates is a lawyer with the firm. He says Native American rights have improved over the years and crimes against them are getting more attention than ever before.
Our people have been very resilient and continue to work and strive. So that just shows our resilience. You know, Osages, natives, we're still here. We've overcome a lot of oppression.
Based on the book of the same name by journalist and author David Grann, Killers of the Flower Moon brings to screen what's known as the Reign of Terror in the 1920s when Osage Indians were murdered for their wealth. According to the book and movie, after oil was found on Osage land, it was ruled that mineral rights were distributed equally to everyone in the tribe. They became the richest people in the world per capita.
Generally, I think that when justice is sought, it is found. So I read the Killers of the Flower Moon several years ago, and it's impactful to me.
However, the government assigned white non Osage guardians to take care of the Osage people's finances, which included the oil revenue. Many Osage natives were mysteriously dying, and main suspects were the legal guardians of the non Osage family members. In Killers of the Flower Moon, Molly Kyle was from an Osage family wealthy for their mineral head rights. Cattle rancher William King Hale from Texas ordered his nephew, Ernest Burkhart, to court and marry Molly Kyle as part of their plot to murder her family members, one by one. The plan was to steal Kyle's family mineral head rights when Burkhart became the only remaining guardian.
I think it's important to show the success and survival of a very strong tribe. My family came from the French side of the tribe. My great-grandfather was interpreter, 1896 to 1906. My grandfather, I.W., founded one of the first villages or towns by an Osage. It's important to show that the Osage people were strong, resilient through the tragedies that occurred, survived. I'm not so sure we have the whole story correct yet, but this is a good start.
Osage citizen Mitch Boulanger attended the screening. He says his family is part of the Osage history and heritage.
And it brings to light the perseverance of the Osage people.
Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann also narrated the story as one of the biggest catalysts to founding of the FBI, formerly the Bureau of Investigation, or BOI. Former Texas Ranger and head of the BOI office in Houston, Tom White led the investigation into Osage homicide cases, especially Molly Kyle's.
So the backstory on this was there were some trips made to Washington, D.C., where they had spoken with some of the political leaders there and had brought some of the things to bear. Now, it took a long time for the Federal Bureau of Investigation to get involved, but once they did, the leader there, J. Edgar Hoover, took a lot of interest in it, and it was part of his sort of major push to start the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
As David Grann talks about in his book, a very young J. Edgar Hoover, I think he was like 27 years old at the time, got elevated, and this was one of his first investigations, sending teams out here. I mean, that was the history. You know what was going on right then here in Tulsa, Oklahoma? the Ku Klux Klan was at their height. We had the Tulsa Race Massacre that occurred just weeks after one of the first killings that's chronicled in this movie happened. It was a bad time, all around, and there just wasn't a lot of acceptance. But you also have to remember also that Oklahoma was a very young state at that time. Oklahoma was founded in 1907. A lot of these things started to happen around 1917, 1918, even through the 20s. And our governmental institutions were young and weren't sure to how to deal with all this. And then you throw in Indian country issues, whether which jurisdiction had the power to investigate and prosecute. All that was getting sorted out too. There was a case called the United States versus Ramsey that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's a topic of this movie as well. And that settled that a tribal allotment is federal jurisdiction for FBI investigation and prosecution by the United States Attorney's Office, Department of Justice. So there was a lot of stuff that had to get worked out at that time. And
Attorney Mike McBride chairs Crow and Dunleavy's Indian Law and Gaming Practice Group. He's been a lawyer for 30 years and dedicated his practice to tribal law and advocacy for indigenous groups. He organized the event and invited leaders from various tribes to see the movie.
We thought that it would be important to have a screening for our clients and colleagues. And I'm happy to see that there's finally a lot of attention about these really painful events. I can tell you I'm formerly a general counsel to the Osage Nation, and I can tell you a lot of Osage citizens did not like to talk about this very hurtful time period. And it's taken a long time to really have a reckoning to discuss these things.
After the screening, we visited Mike McBride again at his office where he tells us more about why he decided to host the event.
I'm a Scotch, Irish, English, French white guy, but I'm very passionate about representing tribes. Currently, we are general counsel to the Comanche Nation, as well as the Peoria Tribe of Indians here in Oklahoma. It's something very personal to me. I grew up in Osage country in Bartlesville, and my mom and my aunt were actually born in Fairfax, where the epicenter of this movie chronicles the event of the Reign of Terror. So that was something very personal and important to me. And it's a story that really needs to be told.
You mentioned you lived on the Osage Nation. How has your personal experience shaped the way you read the book by David Grann and watched the movie?
Well, first, I was just very happy to see more of a comprehensive book that talked about the Reign of Terror. When I grew up, I heard stories about the Reign of Terror and these horrible murders that occurred, poisonings, drownings, shootings, wasting away of people in and around Fairfax and Pawhuska and Gray Horse, that involved the Osage people. And so I tried to find books about it, and David Grann finally wrote a very compelling book in about 2016, and I think it was very well researched and tells the story, particularly from first person, of Molly Burkhardt and the FBI agent, as well as Mr. Grann's own personal experience in doing the research. So I very much appreciate that. There was another book called The Deaths of Sybil Bolton that was written in 1994, and I think that was the first book that I'd found that really chronicled some of what happened from a first-person perspective of the author. He was on a quest to find out what happened to his grandmother. He had heard different stories about how she passed away, and he was a reporter for the Washington Post. And he came back to Osage country to research and write for that book. So that was another book that also influenced me.
Could you also help us understand the significance of the tragic crime in the legal perspective?
Well, the important thing to think about is the greed and how our legal system permitted something like that to happen during that time period. You know, probably from the time of World War I up until maybe the early 1930s, there were unexplained murders and deaths that involved the Osage. But recall that the Osage bargained for their reservation. They bought it in fee, and lo and behold, it contained vast amounts of oil right at a time when oil became very important for our modern industrial times. The Model T came about shortly before that. We went to war, a world war, and there were ships and planes, tanks, and so forth. Oil became super important, and that was something that the Osage had. And the Osage, quite luckily, had negotiated for the mineral rights, the mineral interests, to where they held that as a mineral estate, in which shareholders, and I believe there are 2,226 of them at the time, would all share in that mineral wealth. And the Osage continued to own the minerals under the reservation, even though the reservation got allotted as a result of the allotment time period then.
Today, there's head rights that no one knows who owns. If you go to the government, you ask for Freedom of Information Act, or you try to ask them, they'll say go to your tribe.
We also followed up with Mitch Boulanger later on. At his family cemetery, he shares with us what he knows about the Osage Reign of Terror.
Lineage passed down through the families. For instance, if my father dies and he has a fifth of a head right, then that can be given to myself, my brother, family member. It doesn't have to be next in line, but that's generally how they're passed on. You're also comparing a time where if you received a $300 check in 1918 and you received a $300 check today, it wouldn't get you groceries. Then it was a year's worth of labor. And so, you know, that's how a lot of the stories about the richest people per capita there were on Earth at the time. They were. The Osage were.
How much restriction was it, even after the Osage Nation discovered oil? How the restriction that they had on their own wealth?
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
So my understanding is just what I can see from stories I've been told by tribe members, family members, and documentation that I have now, that guardianship was that was the way. And that guardianship, basically you had to be released by the U.S. government to be sound and fit-minded and almost declared a human to handle your own procedures financially. And if it got out of hand, it seemed like there was a network of people that were involved, all the way down to doctors and all the way down to teachers and whomever they could find to be involved in it. And it was so, I guess the original disinformation. We like that word now, disinformation. It was probably the original disinformation campaign, which probably wasn't the original one, but definitely you get the best people you can to do the script reading, and then you push that narrative. And so I have documentation of my grandfather in the early 1900s being declared competent and guardianship being released, and then even my father being declared that. And so it's interesting to think that we had a time where, you know, again, the government said this is how it's going to be. It's yours, but it's not really yours. They made Native Americans to be the stupid savages, which they weren't. They were brilliant, intelligent people that had a better understanding of the land they lived on than the people that came.
Boulanger says today's generation should do their own research about the Osage Indian murders because he believes there's more to the story than it seems.
You know, I don't claim to be the authority of our tribe or that. I know I'm very proud of it. I want the truth. I want to know those things, and I'm very proud of our family for being a part of that history. and hopefully in a good light. With it being plus 100 years, you hope you're getting pieces of the truth to try to piece together and understand. I think that's the greatest thing that could come from it, is people wanting to have a greater understanding. I would suggest everybody, go and find the FBI murder cases and read them themselves. You can read them. There's redaction. There's stuff that's not there. We just hope that, the younger generations, it's only going to survive with their help. And you can't just go to a movie and think that's the history and the truth. Hopefully they won't stop with what they're told. They'll keep looking. We have too many things in history that we were told that we're now finding out weren't the truth at all.
According to the news reports, Killers of the Flower Moon's global box office has crossed over $150 million so far. He hopes that the movie's success should lead to more support for the tribe and its citizens, like college endowment or funding. Boulanger says although life for Native Americans seems to have changed for the better, there's still mistreatment and discrimination against them.
There are more mineral rights. All we talk about is oil, but there's gas, there's water, and air. Concerning the windmills that are being put up everywhere. A couple of weeks ago, where we found out that the Highway Patrol was given permission by the Attorney General to, if in violation, speeding violation, and that tag, that native tag, did not have residence in the proximity of where that native tag was issued, for instance, Osage County, and you were in Tulsa County, to be ticketed. And my understanding is it's because the compacts or some compact with the tribes were not signed by everybody. And I think our principal chief said that they weren't aware of it and that we would do it. That's interesting to think there's a compact that says we talk about sovereignty, but it doesn't seem like there's much of it there if we still have a group saying, well, this is how, why couldn't we make some phone calls instead of stopping common people on the street, giving them a ticket and telling them you don't live in that county. You're either native or you're not. And if you're not, then let's discuss that.
He believes there should be a deeper level of respect and appreciation for the Osage victims from the Reign of Terror, as well as their history and culture.
We wouldn't make heroes of villains. The villains should not be the heroes. The Osage people should be the hero. My blessing comes from men that planted seeds and trees long before I was born. And we're just getting to reap that blessing. And I think people need to remember that. That, going back to the movie, those people that died, they were someone's family.
Despite diverse opinions on the movie and the book, most of the people we've spoken to have agreed on one thing, that talking about this important period in history sheds light on the victims' legacy and makes sure they're far from being forgotten. Larrison Manygoats, Texas Insider.